Yes, I would like to welcome you all to this recorded session of the lunchtime seminar on the 14th of December 2022 for the Center for World Christianity here at SOAS. We have a candidate at the University of Hamburg in Germany who is going to talk about a topic which is related to his PhD, namely decoloniality, indigenous knowledge, epistemistic reconstitution of Filipino theologies in the Philippines. That is the topic of his PhD. And derived out of this, you have a thematic introduction to the theme, which is, of course, a very which is right in the core interest of our center, namely world Christianity. This is a major center of Christianity in the world, and I'm happy that Hadje Sadje will be introducing this to us. He's also affiliated to the university, to SOAS, University of London, because he is a member of the Palestinian Society. Before I spend any more time talking about our speaker, I would like to turn to Hadje Sadje now and ask him to introduce his topic, which will then open up to discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lars and Professor Dr. Romina, and I'm happy and proud to meet you both, and also I'm surprised to meet Dr. Romina because I'm following her works on decoloniality. Professor, I think I'm allowed to share, right?
Yes, I'm going to let me make you co-host.
Yes, please.
Oh, 1 second. Here. So now you should have a green button.
Yeah.
Is it coming up?
Yes.
Okay.
And now this, okay, let me see. Okay, thank you. So let me begin this paper with reflections on the event in honor of a well-known, well-respected social political anthropologist and Catholic theologian, Karl Gaspar. So my topic is Karl Gaspar's pre-colonial transformative spirituality and the challenge of decoloniality, particularly in the Philippines' religious and theological landscapes. So Gaspar, who has inspired my work, especially my PhD project in Hamburg, much of the work of my friends and colleagues. In February 23, 2021, the Alphonsus Theological and Mission Institute and Ateneo de Davao University, located in southern Philippines, organized a one-day webinar forum dedicated to celebrate the works of Karl Gaspar. During the webinar forum, presenters, including me, shares Gaspar's contribution to the field of Philippine indigenous studies, the colonial project of doing theology, and pre-colonial Filipino spirituality, and the socio-cultural anthropology. Most of us agreed that whether in the form of theory, like having enriched the scholarly canon with theoretical concepts and frameworks of doing theology in the Philippines, or in speaking from his experience, from his location as human rights activist and advocate of human rights of indigenous communities or indigenous people, or peoples, IPs, or IPs, we call it IPs, in southern Mindanao, in the last half century from 1972 to 2020, offer a rich insights for research in general. So the one-day webinar forum was very successful. that Gaspar's theological anthropological contributions to Filipino scholarship, most especially building a non-Western theory or lived experience, both are useful and promising. Like so many underrated non-Western thinkers of the 21st century, Karl Gaspar always evaded the short of neat labeling, which would place him firmly in one or another of the established Filipino activist, poet, theologian, and social anthropologist. However, many scholars regarded him as one of the most influential and inspiring Filipino Catholic theologians in the Philippines today. Aside from being a former martial law political prisoner who fought the Marcos dictatorship, Gaspar is a grassroots educator, prolific writer, playwright, poet, mystic, interfaith scholar, and indigenous human rights defender. As Filipino Catholic priest, Randy Hadje described Karl Gaspar. By the way, this is his work. It's published in the Philippines, and most specifically focus on the role of the religious groups or the Christian faith, promoting human rights, defending the poor and marginalized sectors, and also the indigenous, promoting the rights of the indigenous peoples in the Philippines. So he's a very prolific writer. Now, Filipino Catholic priest Randy Hadje describes Karl Gaspar as theology, I quote, as theology searches for relevance in this period of turmoil and transition, the method of correlation appeared to be among the viable options for theologians. Karl Gaspar appeared to be embraced this method, associated with Paul Tillich, which contends that theology becomes intelligible and relevant when it holds the fruitful tension with human experience, the religious and historical with the ordinary Christian witness as found in the scriptures, and so on and so forth. Recognizing Karl Gaspar's theological and anthropological works as a decolonial work, this begs the question, what is the value of the pre-modern or pre-colonial indigenous spirituality and traditional knowledge in formulating Southeast Asian theories or Southeast Asian theologies, particularly for the purpose of critical knowledge productions in the Philippines? And what is the Karl Gaspar anthropological and theological praxis contribution and the relevance today to the field of epistemic reconstitution or reconstructions of knowledge production, especially in the construction of theory building beyond the Western canon? So the impact of the indigenous knowledge and practices is seen in Gaspar's scholarship. Actually, as I mentioned above, from where Gaspar lived and worked with the indigenous communities or indigenous peoples in Southern Mindanao in the last half century has influenced his perceptions of social purpose and moral principles. Gaspar's exposure to the blatant injustices that pervades the IP or indigenous people communities in the Southern Philippines, which usually renders the efforts to the land grabbing, marginalization in the national local consultation, and militarization of some indigenous peoples' communities in Mindanao, leads him to theorizations of anthropological and theological concepts that address the brazen ideological divide between the haves and the have-nots. That gives Gaspar some advantage to make truthful projections laden with the personal experience and empirical certainty. Obviously, the indigenous human rights defender and his pastoral works experiences of Gaspar is sandwiched between the ongoing colonial impacts and dehumanizing effects and the decolonial experiences in the Philippines. In his book titled Masses Are Messiah, Contemplating the Soul, Filipino Soul, published in 2010, which is, I'm part of this research, Gaspar shows that the pre-colonial Filipino spirituality or indigenous spirituality is transformative-oriented spirituality. And inherently, in Tagalog, we call it maka-Diyos, meaning pro-God, makatao, meaning pro-people, and makakalikasan, pro-nature. Due to Eurocentric biases, the early Spanish colonial period till today, misinformation about pre-colonial Filipino spirituality, or in fact, they demonize the pre-colonial spirituality and practices by the indigenous people in the Philippines, is spearheaded and uncritically accepted as truth. Scholars argue that the pre-colonial Filipino spirituality has been perceived to be passive, complacent, irrational, and dualistic. These Western views, however, are controversial and rejected by many Filipino scholars nowadays, including Karl Gaspar. In fact, according to Gaspar, a central characteristic of pre-colonial Filipino spirituality, like indigenous knowledge, skills, practices, spirituality, is also known as the IKSPS, is holistic in nature, dynamic, and actively engaging. But what are the contours and hidden assumptions of his view on pre-colonial spirituality or indigenous spirituality, especially in the constructions of social theory or theological model or reflections beyond the Western canon? Without being exhaustive, I believe that it may be helpful to mention at least 7 points that we could derive and learn from Gaspar's anthropological and theological works. Taking from a decolonial perspectives, from the inspirations of Walter Mignolo and Anibal Quijano and Nelson Maldonado Torres, etc., etc., etc. When it comes to addressing these enormous tasks to dismantling the privilege of Eurocentric knowledge as a common political social task for non-Western theory construction or theological reflection, it requires delinking from the Eurocentric American models of knowledge productions, including theological models. It requires the other epistemologies or model of knowledge outside the Western hegemonic framework. As a well-known American sociologist, C.W. Mills suggests that there exists a global system that privileges the whites and normalizes their beneficial white privilege position. In his article titled Why Indigenous Knowledge in the 21st Century, a Decolonial Turn, published in 2014, a decolonial African scholar, Morgan Neluvu, makes a similar observation. So I will not going to cite because I think it's better to to dialogue and to discuss my project. So I agree with Mills and Nilovu. As a matter of fact, this trend is certainly omnipresent in contemporary Filipino theological and religious landscape. Not to mention philosophy and social sciences, where one observes there's a sense of superiority being fixed to European authors or thinkers or models or theories in a frequent use or mimicry of the Western models in building theory and research framework. One of the goals of decoloniality is the epistemic disobedience. The aim of epistemic disobedience is not only to dismantle but to unmask the privilege of Eurocentric thinking over non-Western thinking or epistemologies. However, this project can only be realized when these Eurocentric American epistemologies can be examined. Okay, looking at Gaspar, like Gaspar theopraxis framework, with the indigenous inspirations, epistemic disobedience call into questions the basis of and the control of demonic knowledge, especially the demonization of indigenous knowledge, skills and practices and spiritualities, and offers a way of reaffirm the significance of situated knowledge. Hence, using decolonial scholars, decolonial thinking or thought like Quijano, Mignolo, Torres, Castro Gomez reject the hubris of zero-point epistemology. According to Santiago Castro Gomez, the hubris of zero-point epistemology claims that knowing subject is detached and neutral point of the observation. We call that in the philosophy, they call it Archimedean point, a view of time from outside time, a view of science from elsewhere, a view of spatial reality from nowhere. This knowing subject maps the world and its problems, classifies people, projects, including knowledge, in what is good for them. However, decolonial scholars contend that all knowledge, specifically scientific knowledge, is historically conditioned and universally imposed. Second, in relation to the first argument, in the inspired of the Gaspar's work, it problematizes the lack of plurality of knowledge in constructing political and theological reflection, and fails to recognize the benefits of the indigenous knowledge and practice. Transposing this in the decolonial project, epistemic disobedience reject the notion that there is only one normative or orthodox or Western canon of thinking that applies to various contexts and cultures. More importantly, epistemic obedience condemn the epistemic violence that silence the voices of marginalized groups like the indigenous people, the wisdom and the practical knowledge of the indigenous peoples in the Philippines. Next, epistemic disobedience or decolonial challenge to interrogate the epistemological or epistemologies, the privileged epistemologies of the global north, particularly the epistemological model that privilege the Western knowledge and subordinate the non-Western knowledge like the indigenous Filipino knowledge, wisdom, and practices. Aside from that, it holds that the knowledge production requires pluralistic formations. Therefore, it rejects inferiorized non-Western or other epistemologies, but engendered epistemological pluralism. Aside from decoloniality, fosters holistic-oriented or intersectionality, academic research that is grounded in people, particularly the vulnerable and marginalized groups, a place and a history and a nature. Then, aside from that, it develops an epistemological framework to value indigenous systems of knowledge, advances cosmic justice and spirituality, which reject the dualistic worldview, the sacred, secular, or theory practice divide. And then lastly, using from the inspiration of Karl Gaspar's work, transposing that to decolonial perspective, it calls for a collective self-reflective inquiry undertaken by participants in the design of policies, especially the IP or the indigenous people communities in social situation in order to improve their own social practices. And then let me conclude. Since Asia, like Philippines, has plurality and diversity of peoples, culture, and social institutions, religions, and ideologies, and above all, Philippines as a country have had a colonial experience. Following decoloniality in Gaspar works, I argue that theory or theological reflections must be contextualized, particularly for the purpose of critical knowledge production. More crucially, Filipino decolonial thinkers, as they contend that theory must be practical in the distinctively moral rather than instrumental sense. I'm convinced that theological reflections provide the descriptions or decoloniality or any theories, even Western, provide a descriptive normative base for social inquiry. However, any theological knowledge or reflection or religious studies do not merely seek to provide means to achieve some independent goals or to provide understanding and explanation. As Cameroonian decolonial political philosophers Hadje argues, it is not just simply to provide informed, descriptive explanations, but rather to offer critical judgment that seek human emancipation in circumstances of domination and oppressions of colonial matrix of power. Lastly, I believe that it is the right time for Filipino scholars to dig up our own indigenous wellspring to develop a holistic social transformation model. We must, as Filipino, take control our lives and reclaim our voices as coming from the global South and becoming the agent of our own history. And I think let me end with that. This is my 2 books published this year in case. Okay.
I just need to unmute myself. Yes, thank you very much. It was what I call a theoretical paper that was linked to the social reality of the Filipino setting, but goes far beyond it. And I remember from the sessions that we had in the context of the African theologians last year that we talked about very similar the application of theological guidelines for the functioning of society. That because that's, after all, we don't exist in a vacuum. And
yes,
the question that I have, and I've seen that Romina has already written something in here, is I'll approach it less theoretically and more from a historian's viewpoint. What are the roots? Is there anything that you can already identify in the period of the late 18th century, late 19th century, when we look at the missionary orders who were present in the Philippines at that time? Was because I know that in Jesuit circles, there were very similar voices that were being raised after the Jesuits had been reconstructed. I just wonder whether there's any influence that you can see.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Lars, for your good questions and difficult questions. Actually, we have, I think, several scholars who already conducted, empirical studies,
yes,
literature reviews, historical studies, that can be found in the archival in the Philippines to prove that there are several themes and how do you call it? Knowledge of pre-colonial, pre-Spanish, pre-colonial Spanish knowledges and practices, even wisdoms, how we deal with our everyday life. So even anthropologists, American, European anthropology, they already written a lot of books about these themes and wisdoms, knowledge and practices. So, but unfortunately, most of the curriculum, including curriculum university, the content of the curriculum is very Eurocentric. That not devalued, but put these literatures, important literatures and studies lay aside from the main content of our university curriculum.
Oh, okay. But do you have any? I mean, the roots, of course, they go back to more than just a single, single inspiration. Is there anything in the indigenous, perhaps not strictly speaking, a Catholic tradition that you can find?
Yeah. There's a lot, no, but I cannot. By the way, Professor Lars,
yes,
the indigenous traditions and practices and beliefs are still intact in the Philippines. Yeah. So you are not just not only to see them by by the research produced by the scholars from West and from Filipino scholars, but they're still there.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they are the direct, prove that prior to the colonial period, we have our own, social orders, laws, languages, so even uniforms. I mean, clothes, the dress codes,
yes.
and by the way, we have more than 80 languages.
Mm-hmm. Yes, not just Tagalog.
80 languages that's still, intact.
Yes.
And spoken, although some of them are endangered or already, losing because of, we have also, dominant languages that practice or spoken in the Philippines, like English and the Tagalog. But still, despite that, the languages and the practices and the tribes, the indigenous communities are still intact in the Philippines.
Uh-huh. This takes me to a question which I'm going to read it out because Romina wrote something in the chat. And that is a question concerning spirituality as a term. Is there, I'm going to read, is there a particular definition being used, or does spirituality refer broadly to traditional belief systems that were found in the Philippines before Christianization or Islamicization in the 16th century? And then secondly, I wonder whether the importance of learning non-mainstream languages in the Philippines might be in people being able to access indigenous spiritual belief systems and knowledge. So one about influences and one about languages.
Yes, spirituality. Thank you very much for that. Very good questions, and also, again, difficult question. But the spirituality, the term spirituality in the Philippines are very westernized. It was imported in the Philippines. So until now, we have debate between religion and spirituality. Karl Gaspar preferred to use spirituality because it's more, beyond religious, term and concept for him. It's more broader than the concept of Western concept of religion. But although religion is, the term spirituality is also very limiting, no? Although for some Filipino anthropologists, religious studies scholars, and also like younger generations or scholars of younger generations of religious study, we also prefer to use spirituality because it's like, for example, Karl Gaspar defines spirituality as more broader, not institutional, not geared toward particular theological and religious orientation. That's why
if I may add,
yeah.
Not to interrupt you, but in psychology, spirituality pertains to wider understanding of meaning making, existential meaning making, which is not necessarily predicated on a religious tradition that might be monotheistic, Abrahamic, or
exactly. It's go beyond the Abrahamic religion, that's why even anthropologists and sociologists now, they're more now sensitive, to the use of religion and spirituality if they going to, use that as a operative term to describe a particular, religious or spiritual practicing group in the Philippines. Like especially now, the Pentecostal movement in the Philippines is also growing. Now they basically, offer a very American, Western type of definition of religion that very anti non-Christian, forms of spirituality. So so that's why that's but now, like for example, Karl Gaspar he adopted basically the definition or descriptions of spirituality from the Dutch scholar, the Carmelites from Nijmegen or Roundbound University, that this tradition, Catholic tradition, definition of spirituality, it's more transdisciplinary, understanding and use of the word spirituality.
And Hadje, can I ask you, how are the, obviously linguistic diversity is part of decoloniality and decolonization to promote indigenous languages. How is that effort being made in the Philippines in trying to promote other languages that were perhaps spoken by tribes or indigenous groups that would be necessary to kind of reinvigorate these spiritual belief systems and to be able to access them? And then the other question is, is there a script for these languages? Were they written or experienced oral traditions? Thank you.
The first questions, thank you very much, Dr. Binat, for that two important questions. First, when it comes to the policy, how the government, included this, accommodating this indigenous languages. Actually, they said we are very, very sensitive now to use the indigenous languages, because they said all language is language, But in terms of policy, the government now, the decolonial or post-colonial project in the Philippines are still ongoing, because institutions are very, very, very American, very patterned to American system, even laws. In fact, imagine our laws is spoken and discussed, our constitutions, pass, discuss, study in the language, in the American language. And then we have this, street language, which is spoken by the dominant Filipinos, the Tagalog. So I would say it's still ongoing. There are still challenges because now we have globalization. English is more demand. If you want at least decent job, you need to learn how to speak English, at least Tagalog than English, because it makes easier for you to get good job or money for. That's the the challenge now among the indigenous. Luckily, despite these challenges, you see the language are now, for example, the National Commissions on Historical Culture in the Philippines, they are promoting the use of languages like the marginalized language, like languages from the indigenous community, only to to make aware the city people that we have these people around us that are marginalized, and they are sided by the policymakers. So they now promoting that little by little, but I think it's not enough because the challenge now, because of the economic crisis in the Philippines, everybody want to learn English, but yeah, the colonial and post-colonial projects still, a challenge in the Philippines. Now when it comes to the second question, is there any script? Yes, there's a lot of rediscovering and promoting the pre-colonial script in the Philippines, especially in some individuals and groups advancing to promote these subjects or learning or script to the lower schools, or the college, university level, and also in the secondary level. They want to introduce these pre-colonial scripts little by little, but it's well preserved. It's not actually erased, or it's well preserved until now. Especially now, scholars are getting more interested in this script.
Yes.
But it's 10 years ago. But 10 years ago, before, I think it's not really attracted to young scholars, but now it's more getting attentions to young generation of scholars.
Have any of these scripts been used in order to translate the Bible or passages of the Bible into minority languages?
Yes, there are several non-Tagalog, we call it non-Tagalog languages. They already translated that in the non-Tagalog or spoken languages in the Philippines. But the challenge still is the finance, the funding, and I think that's why Decolonial project, it's very important in the Philippines, because I think if you ask majority of the young Filipino generations now, they are more inclined to learn English language and other European languages like German, Spanish, because there's a money there. This influence, and the curriculum in the university is more, they offering more of these languages than offering the native, or not native, but the other languages.
Yes. Arabic too.
Arabic too.
When I lived in Cairo, there were many nannies that came from the Philippines, and they were building workers.
Yes.
They spoke very good Arabic.
There's some very good questions from Dr. Romina. Also, the Catholic Protestant churches, Dr. Romina, to be honest, I'm one of the part of the small group who advancing the colonial project in the Philippines. And if you see in my presentation, we have poster or call for participation in 2018, and it's only attended by the young scholars. But excuse. Well, I think it's a different story if you talk about institutional, because institutions in the Philippines, they're very patriarchal. The issue of patriarchy in the Philippines are still very strong, the old, big boss in the church, the vanguard of the truth, the Christian truth, still very challenging. When it comes to the level of non-institutional, there are individual groups of scholars, or they are advancing this project of decolonizing project in the Philippines, like decolonizing politics, decolonizing languages, decolonizing social institution, decolonizing government, etc., etc. But still, it's a very, very small groups of people who are willing to engage in the decolonial project. And also another challenge in the Philippines, we have a different notions of decoloniality, and they said some of them equate the project of post-coloniality to decoloniality. But for me, it's a very, very different for me, following Mignolo and Anibal Quijano. Most of them are still, they said, we're already doing that, the post-colonial, during the 1970s to 80s. But now, I think 3 years ago, but now even government adopted the word decolonial, to promote diverse languages in the Philippines. But still, it's not enough, especially for the institutional churches. They are very it's very hard, to challenge and to decolonize, especially for example, in the Catholic and the Protestant mainline churches. They are the number one reluctant, or they have very strong disposition to the LGBT rights in the Philippines. I'm not saying that's bad, but that's the reality now in the Philippines. So for them, decoloniality, in order to be true and to be genuine, you need to include all these rights. Yeah. And it's funny, Philippines are the second country aside from Vatican that we don't have still divorce in the Philippines.
So
because of this, very strong sense of, Christianity, they said.
We have the final question from Romina, which I'll read out. How are the mainstream religions and traditional spiritual belief systems engaging with gender inequalities? Catholic missions often proud themselves in opening the opportunities for education for girls and helping them to overcome harmful cultural traditions. Is that the case in the Philippines?
That's a very, loaded question, but that is very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Mina. First, the mainstream religion in the Philippines, like majority are Catholic. The second minority, the largest minority is Islam, but it's growing. When it comes to gender equalities, as I mentioned, it's still very patriarchal. However, some mainline Protestant mainline churches ordain women bishops. They ordain now women to become bishops, including Filipino Pentecostalism. They ordain Filipino women bishops and pastors and ministers. But when it comes to Catholic, I think that's still too far for the Catholic to accept that. That's some individual Protestant bishops still, are not still okay with, ordaining women's, but many Protestant churches, aside from Catholic and the mainline Protestant churches, they're already ordaining women. But still, there are some issues still that are not addressed when it comes to gender equality. Let me include share this. This traditional spiritual belief system, basically, like for example, the pre-colonial spirituality, they promote, most of them, I'm not saying all, based on my study, most of them, they promote egalitarian system. We have priestess, pre-colonial women priests that are very powerful. They were consulted by the political leaders during the pre-colonial. They are consulted. They asking for some spiritual and political advices during the pre-colonial society, especially in what we call the Visayas region, in the middle part of the Philippines. There's a huge amount of women that are ordained as a priest, but not in the Christian way. Yeah, they're very powerful. But when the Spanish came to the Philippines, they successfully, however, to eradicate the system, the egalitarian system, and they promote the hierarchical system in the Philippines. Second, lastly, please allow me to share also this one. This is very important. The Catholic in the practices of Catholicism in the Philippines are not mixed, but it collides. I mean, it integrated with our indigenous practices and beliefs. No, one scholars, like for example, Vicente Rafael, who conducted an empirical study and wrote a book. There are Catholic stories, like for example, gospel that localize or indigenize as a form of resistance against the Spanish oppressive colonial power during that time. So, it's not black and white. The Christian came to the Philippines, and then the locals try to adopt, accept, embrace the Christian faith, but they reconstruct a different form of Christianity. And they use this tool to educate the masses to fight against the colonial power.
Thank you very much. We're coming close to the 2 o'clock end, but it seems to me as if we'd only just talked for 5 minutes, because this is, I have so many more questions to ask, but maybe I was very interested in the, that's something that Romina also mentioned, and you also talked in the same direction, but I want to be more specific, namely in many parts of the developing world, you have very special types of American Protestant missionaries who go and who try to offer a lot of money to, or the prospect of...
Until now, Prof, until now.
And when you talked about, you know, the allure of the West, of English, you know, America, I thought maybe that's also part of the religious sphere, that this hope of a future without economic problems, that is somehow linked in the missionary message of American missions. It need not necessarily be American, but I mean, it's, often we have that link. Is there anything that you can work on?
Yeah, I think, Professor Lars, that's true. I think that's true everywhere. You know, and in the Philippines now, like, for example, there are movement within United Methodist Church in the Philippines to, you know, to stop, you know, to be independent organization, getting away from the control of the US-based United Methodist Church. But they said, oh, we need still funding to do our works here, mission work here in the Philippines. And also, there are also issues, but I'm not saying that's bad, you know. I'm not saying, I'm not in that place to say, oh, that's bad. Although that's also, the disadvantage also is, I think the model and approach to do missions is, I think, problematic, or for me, still problematic. You know, because if you still, you know, using the old way to do missions in the Philippines, I think that is very problematic. You know, if you all, like, for example, the American, you know, Pentecostal movement, the classical, because you have 3 waves of Pentecostalism in the Philippines. You have the classical Pentecostal 1960s, 70s, you know, they have this, you know, revival, speaking tongues movement, miracle doing, you know, miracles, signs and wonders movement. And the American are, you know, they are really funding these crusades, their crusades in provinces, and actually it's very successful. By the way, I'm coming from a Pentecostal tradition. So this is very, I observed it's very, very successful. In fact, after the first wave, you have the second wave, you know, the Catholic charismatic movement emerged in the Philippines in response to the classical, you know, Pentecostal. So they form, you know, Catholic version, they call it charismatic movement. And you have the third wave, you know, the like, for example, Benny Hinn style, you know, Benny Hinn or Billy Graham style Pentecostal still also happened in the Philippines. We have several tele preacher evangelists now in the Philippines that are very influential in terms of politics. Even Duterte, you know, and also the Junior Marcos, they're connected with, you know, supporting this radical, although sometimes too much politics. But yeah, these all are, you know, the model are funded by the American or the European or even British. And then the model are still problematic, you know, impose, preach. And the challenge now for me, what I observed from my movement, the missionaries, you know, taking pictures, funding them money, promoting crusades. But the content of the preaching is only to save souls. And they you know, downplay the socio-political issues in the Philippines.
Yes. Yes, although of course in practice that is often very much linked. It's you know, I just have come across it in many places, even in China, you know, in China where you have there is the link between the foreign, the non-Chinese missionary organizations and the churches was cut 1949, but still the pattern that they pursue is very similar. It's it's well anyway.
Prof. Lars, last please.
Yes.
Another interesting movement when
Yes.
90s to 20s, 1990s and 2020s, you have these Korean missionaries use the same method of missionary model, you know, funding them, taking picture, preaching soul winning, saving souls. It's the same. And most of them are, at least the first generation is okay, but the second and the third generation, you know, is a money generating thing. Huh? And it become a very problematic within the evangelical and Pentecostal, even Baptist communities in the Philippines. They divide and bring another problems.
Yes. I mean, that goes without saying, because the flip side is, you know, if you're still poor after converting, then, you know, is this a case of God being upset with you? Or, you know, are you sinful, too sinful to be rich? So, but anyway, I think we need to draw to a close now, but these are just lunchtime talks, which are meant to be very short. And I would love to, as Romina said, just love to take you out now for some coffee, but we sit in 3 different places, so this is not possible.
I hope next year I can visit you. Professor Lars and Dr. Mina, thank you very much for these great opportunities. And I hope I can help, you know, contribute to the center, especially the expansions in Southeast Asia, as I mentioned, you know, in the email or in the Facebook with Professor Lars. I'm willing to help. And yes, I'm determined to visit you next year.
Yes, thank you very much. Or we could come to Hamburg. That's also possible.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, thank you so much. And I am going to stop the recording now. And thank you for everyone to listen to this.
Thank you, Dr. Gregorio.
Thank you, Lars, for setting this up. And I'm sorry for my background noise. I would have asked more questions, Hadje. I just didn't want to create noise.
Okay.
But it was a lovely talk, and I'd love to invite you also to our Project Dodo network to give a talk. So yeah, let's keep in touch. I'd love to know more about you.
Dr. Romina, please. I'm so happy that when I saw your name, oh my God. Because I'm following also your work.
Yes.
Thank you, Hadje. Well done, and good luck with your work.
Thank you, Professor Lars.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.